last year, as I was working with my congregation and we were doing some more practical issues, we had just finished working through a book of the Bible and I was coming through some practical things. I thought about this whole concept of manipulation. And I was looking at something that my good friend Lou Praola wrote, and as I was looking at his material and doing some other research and just looking at my life and trying to understand the nature of things, I would get so many questions about people and manipulation. And part of this, as I share with you, as I went through the study and started looking at it in my life and again in different roles and responsibilities and how I have done it and have had it done to me, one of the things that I realized as we'll begin to talk about manipulation is one simple reality. You're only manipulated because you like what people are selling. No one manipulates you when you don't like what they're selling. If you don't believe also, they have a hold on you. If there's something you are afraid of that you're going to lose, or you're afraid that you're not going to gain, no one has power to manipulate you. And their manipulation is only because of the thing that you treasure, that you believe they hold in their hands. But the moment you stop worshiping that thing and start worshiping the Lord, they can't manipulate you. And I found that fascinating over the years, and I wanted to just help you with that, to consider that, because we often think that we are being manipulated because of some powerful person or some powerful entity that we just could not overcome. No, you're being manipulated because what they're holding out to you deals with your neediness or your greediness. And because you will not accept what God has allowed or submit to His will, you believe that they can take something from you or give something to you that you've made more important. They got you. It's not because you're not smart. It's not because you don't know the truth. It's not because you don't know what the Scripture says. It's because you are consumed with what they're selling you. And I remember I did this illustration, or asked a question in a group I was training. I said, okay, guys, I've got a question for you. Who has the greater power? Is it the drug addict or the drug dealer? And they all had different ideas. Oh, it's the drug dealer. Oh, it's the drug addict. And I let them go on and on and on and on. And I asked them to give me all of their different reasons why. I said, well, let me be honest with you. The one that has the ultimate power is the drug addict, not the drug dealer. They were like, oh, how can you say that? I said, did you not understand the first basic law of economics? Supply and demand? They said, we're not following you. I said, okay. I said, I'm going to do something with you, you millennials, you young ones. And the older ones in the group like me will get this. And I said, all right, I've got some 8-track tapes up here. How many of you old enough to even know what 8-track tapes are? All right, amen. So I got some people that know what I'm talking about, right? Now, somebody's looking around, what's an 8-track? Google it, okay? For those who don't know, Google it. So let's say I've got some 8-track tapes up here, and I tell you what, y'all are such a good set of people. I'm going to sell them to you for, if you get 5 for $20, I'll give you 10. I got any takers? Okay, y'all are wearing me down. How about this? You buy one, I'll give you 5. If you buy one for $100, I'll give you 5. Still no takers, right? Now, what if I had some, I don't know, 75-inch flat screens up here, and I'm giving them away for $5 a piece? Do I have any takers? Supply and demand, right? They're not hot, I promise you. I cooled them down before I stole them off the truck. No, I'm kidding. But you get my point. And what I was trying to share with that set of individuals, yes, a drug dealer has power, but their power is only connected to what the addict wants from them. Satan is the same way. He's powerful. I'll never take away the fact he's powerful, but he works on the things that you like that you're not willing to give up for worship, the areas you're willing to compromise. So his manipulation works because you like what he's selling. Let me give an example. Now, nobody here knew this, but my weakness are chocolate chip cookies. And I have lost about 80 pounds in the last 8 months. And it's because I don't eat chocolate chip cookies. like I used to, but I had to have one today. So I was in line and I was sitting there and I kept looking at the cookie and I'm going, you know what, nobody will know that I've been saying no to cookies, but if I say yes today, will I start to say yes tomorrow? And for me, it was easy, like that's one day I'm good, I move on. But the reality is there's an issue there and I have to be careful. And what if you guys put a whole plate of chocolate chip cookies and said, hey, why don't you come to our house? We got some freshly baked chocolate chip cookies for you. Oh, man. Now there's a struggle. Because I want to come fellowship, but I don't need the cookies, but I don't want to be impolite, but I also want to eat those cookies. You see where I'm going? Satan loves to put you in compromising positions with things that you like, where you should say no, but you don't. Now, why am I going there? Manipulation is just an avenue where there's something that someone has put over you because of something you don't want to lose or something you want to gain. And they can sway you any way they want, not because you're not smart, not because you don't know Scripture, not because you don't have discernment. Let me tell you how simple it is. It's because we're selfish. The more selfish I am, the more manipulated I can be. So with that in mind, I want us to be thinking about this concept of manipulation, and I want you, and we've got so many passages, I won't be able to cover them the way I'd like to, but I do want you to begin to go back and review as many of these as you can. And as you do, I want you to think about this working definition of manipulation. Come on, my iPad went dead on me for just a moment. Here we go. Definition of manipulation. Here is what it is. To seek to control, to coerce, to constrain someone through evil means or evil intentions in order that that person may move or not move in a particular course of action one desires. Let me read that again. To seek to control, coerce, or constrain someone through evil means or evil intentions in order that that person may move or not move in a particular course of action one desires. Let me give you some examples in the Bible where we see manipulation working, and we will look at these passages. I want you to turn to Luke chapter 10, verse 40. Luke chapter 10, verse 40. We're going to look at a few of these passages where we see some examples of the definition that we've just talked about happening. In Luke 10, verse 40, we seek to arouse guilt by implying through a question that a person does not care in order to steer people to do what they desire. And we know this story pretty well, don't we? This is the story of Martha. Look at Luke chapter 10, verse number 40. But Martha was distracted with all her preparations, and she came up to him and said, now here's interesting. She came up to the Lord. Matter of fact, before I read this, let me see if I can just paint the picture. Just so you can get the idea. God is at your house. Okay, let me just make it plain. God is at, let me get country. He at your house. Okay, that's what we say in Texas. Not your house. He's at your house. Okay? God has made himself comfortable in your house, and he's giving you some insight. You and your brother or your sister. Your brother or your sister is sitting at the feet of God, giving insight. You're off preparing and distracted by all this other stuff versus sitting at the feet of God at your house. Now, because things aren't going the way you think they ought to go, you've created in your mind this idea, perception, sound familiar from last night, that these people, including God, doesn't care about you, because if they cared about you, whatever that stuff God is in there talking about, you know, with your brother, your sister, is irrelevant. What's most important is what I'm doing over here. So you know what? Let me interrupt them. Let me interrupt God in the midst of his conversation in my house, and then challenge him with a manipulative question. Do you not care? Now let that sink in, because when you read this story, you got to read it with that reality. You're asking God in a manipulative way, do you not care? And then look at what she adds on. This always fascinates me. But Martha was distracted with all her preparations. She came up to him and said, "Do you not care that my sister has left me to do all the serving alone? Then tell her to help me." So if you care for me, you will agree with me in my indictment of my sister, and you will also move her to get off her tail and come in here and help me. Because if you really cared about me, then you would stop what you were doing to make sure that what I was doing was addressed and done well by my sister, who I believe does not really care, or she wouldn't have left me in here while you're in there talking. Do y'all understand how ugly that really is when you read that story? What's really being said? And the manipulation behind those words, "Do you not care?" And by the way, I'm indicting my sister on the cool as I'm saying, "Do you not care?" That she's left me in here, because she should be in here with me, not sitting at your feet. So whose agenda at that moment was the most important agenda to Martha? Wow. Even before God's agenda. And God said, "You're distracted by so many things, but the one thing that's important, I'm not taking from your sister." That's manipulation. When you are telling somebody, listen, including God, by the way, you don't care unless you do what I want right now. Because that's what Martha was saying. Right now is more important than sitting at your feet. And how often are we distracted and then we want to try to manipulate people in God to stop what they're doing to address us? Anybody see anything wrong with that? Or is that just the way things are? Is that a problem? That's a form of manipulation. So, seeking to arouse guilt by implying through a question the person does not care in order to steer people to do what one desires. James chapter 4, verse 1 to verse 3, seeking to fight and quarrel with people or pray with wrong motives in order to steer people and God to do what one desires. That's that person who loves to try to intimidate or fight you as a way of manipulation to get you to do what they want. I forget the year, but I was working at a church and this guy was abusing his wife, and he thought raising his voice and standing up was going to make a difference for me. And he raised his voice and stood up. I stood up and said, "If you don't sit down and get a hold of yourself, you've lost your mind." I said, "I'm admonishing the unruly. What makes you think that you can come in here with that attitude?" I said, "This is why this woman is doing what she's doing right now. You're trying to intimidate and manipulate. If you want things to go right, you need to humble yourself before the Lord. This is unnecessary and unacceptable in this office. And we will not let you hurt this woman any longer. So you got two choices here. But one of them is never that you'll put your hands to hurt this woman again as long as she's at this church. It's your call what you want to do next." Manipulation by trying to intimidate. But what if I had the fear of man? What if I was more concerned about him liking me or hitting me than I was about loving that person in the room? Whatever you want. And why would it have worked? Not because he was powerful, but because my fear and my worship would have been more important than my love for the woman who was in need of protection. Am I making sense to you? Manipulation. Here's another example of this. Luke chapter 6, verse 2, seeking openly to accuse a person of wrongdoing in order to steer the person to agree with the accusations to bring the person down from their level of authority in order to gain one's desire. Let's see this in Luke chapter 6. Luke chapter 6. Looking at verse number 2. Let's start at verse 1 for context. Now it happened that as he was passing through some grain fields on the Sabbath, and his disciples were picking the heads of grain, rubbing them in their hands and eating the grain. But some of the Pharisees said, "Why do you do what is not lawful on the Sabbath?" And Jesus answering them said, "Have you not even read what David did when he was hungry and he and those who were with him. And he entered the house of God and took and ate of the consecrated bread with the not lawful for any to eat except the priest, and gave it to his companions. And he was saying to them, the Son of Man is Lord of the Sabbath. But they tried to hook him in. I've had people do that. You've had people do that. Openly accuse you with a question. Why are you doing that? Don't you think that you should be doing something different other than that? I've had people in business meetings. Well, Pastor, are we sure that's what we want to do? We are very sure. The question is, do you have a concern? Well, I do. Well, instead of posing it as if we are sure, I need you to ask the question of your concern, not try to cast doubt on our decision. Wherever you show it out, I will work it out. I'm that guy. If you act up in public, I'm going to help you in public. If you want to do it privately, we do it privately. But let's not play games with God's business and God's church. Are you with me on that, guys? Does that make sense? And that was manipulation. How many times have we played these kind of games in order to push what we want? How often have you done this in your marriage, in your relationships, to get what you want? Luke chapter 20, verse 19 to verse 22, seeking to use flattery and seeking to pigeonhole a person into a corner with questions that limits his answers to yes or no in order to gain what one desires. Turn to Luke chapter 20. Let me show you an example of that. I have people do that on the radio all the time. Dr. Ellen, we're just so excited about your wisdom. I'm like, uh-oh. And we really appreciate what you have some insight in. Now, bam, here comes the setup question that put me in the corner. It's like, wow. They set me up with flattery, thinking that would work, and then they went in for the kill. Look at Luke chapter 20, verse 19 to verse 22. The scribes and the chief priests tried to lay hands on him that very hour, and they feared the people, for they understood that he spoke this parable against them. So they watched him and sent spies to pretend to be righteous in order that they might catch him in some statement, so that they could deliver him to the rule and the authority of the governor. And they questioned him, saying, Teacher, we know that you speak and teach correctly, and you are not partial to any, but teach the way of God in truth. Isn't that a setup? Be careful when people do that. They're setting you up. Is it lawful for us to pay taxes to Caesar or not? But he detected their trickery and said to them, Show me a denarius. Whose likeness and inscription does it have? They said, Caesar's. And he said to them, Then render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's. Examples of trying to manipulate. Now, I bring them up because I want you to think about you and how you have tried to manipulate in your relationship and how you have been manipulated. And one of the things I want you to recognize is that it is never right to try to coerce people according to your agenda. That is never a loving thing to do. So, with that in mind, number two, what are some of the basic desires that can become inordinate desires leading to manipulation? And what I mean by this is this. The only reason why you can be manipulated is because there's something you desire that has become more important to you than loving God, loving others, and using the discernment that God has given you or that you've developed in. Because there's so many people that I've sat with and said, I knew something was wrong, but I had a sense that it wasn't the thing to do, but. And I said, the only reason the but is there is because what you wanted was more important than what you discerned. So the manipulation happened because there are some desires of your heart that became more important than the will of God. And let's talk about that for a moment. When what you want becomes more important than loving God and loving others, you will create a love of something that becomes sinful, which makes it inordinate, which can lead you to seek to manipulate to have it. You're either manipulated or you manipulate, because I want what I want when I want it. Let's look at some of the things that if you're not careful, you can want it so much that you're willing to manipulate to have it. You can create a sinful love of security, willing to sin to get it and sin when one doesn't give it to you, which can lead you to seek to manipulate to have it. How much security is enough security, by the way? Ask a person who loves security. They can never give you an answer, can they? Because it's never enough. Number two, you can create a sinful love of approval, willing to sin to get it and sin when one doesn't give it to you, which can lead you to seek to manipulate to have it. How much approval is enough approval? What are you willing to do to get it? Thirdly, you can operate or create a sinful love of power, willing to sin to get it and sin when you don't, leading to being manipulative to have it. Fourthly, you can create a sinful love of having your own way, not being denied what you want. You can create a sinful love for comfort or pleasure. You can create a sinful love of being held in high regard. You can create a sinful love for being understood. You can create a sinful love for being taken care of. How much is enough? We'll never know with you. Because the more you want it, you're willing to manipulate to have it. And let me share with you some of the general ways that we seek to manipulate people. And I don't want you to raise your hands. I don't want you to nudge anybody. But I do want you to think about, if I get honest, I've been manipulative. I've been manipulated. And here's some of the things that I see that I've done or have been done to me, and now I know why at the end of the day. It wasn't that I didn't know. It wasn't that, I didn't have enough insight. I wanted what I wanted. And what God wanted was not as important as what I wanted. General ways that you may seek to manipulate people. Consider this. Manipulation in general is generated by a heart filled with bitter jealousy or selfish ambition, earthly, natural, demonic wisdom. Therefore, when you are operating out of bitter jealousy or selfish ambition, here's some of the things you'll try to do. Charging, to accuse someone of doing something wrong because it does not line up with your agenda. Clamoring, to create conflict, to argue over what you want the person to think and not think or feel, or not feel, or desire, or not desire, or do, or not do according to your agenda. Crying, to use tears as a means to show the person they have done something wrong. Challenging, to use why questions in a way that is not seeking legitimate answers, but seeking to show disapproval and rejection. Coercing, to seek to enforce or invoke some form of obligation using words you should often to bring about what you want from the person. Here's one. Compiling, to bring up words, actions, or decisions from the past to compare and contrast the person's words, actions, or decisions to some other situation or to prove hypocrisy or contradiction. Condemning, to verbally express disapproval of punishment by putting down or accusing. Concealing, to withhold any favorable regard or emotion towards the person. Cooperating, to go along with the other person in order to get the person to do what you want. Charming, to be pleasant, likable, or endearing to get the person to give you what you want or to do what you want. Criticizing, to bring up negative issues about the person, whether perceived or actual, with a negative tone in an attempt to get the person to stop or start something you want them to do or give you something you want. Commanding, talking to the person as if they were your child, using intimidation and implying that if they don't comply, there will be some kind of negative and devastating consequences. Canceling, to noticeably dismiss or disregard a person as doing or saying in order to demonstrate disapproval, to lead the person to do what you want. Conducting, injecting your input, ideas, agenda, opinions, and directives into everything a person seeks to think, say, or do, while seeking to make the person believe they are wrong if they choose to reject your input, your ideas, agenda, opinions, and directives. Conditioning, seeking to reward or punish people according to how much they do what you want, when you want, as a routine, leading them to being habituated to your agenda accordingly. I want to stop there. How many of you saw yourself? I don't want to see your hands. How many of you saw you? How many of you saw what has happened to you? All of this happens, ladies and gentlemen, because we are consumed with having our way. When we love God more than we are loving ourselves and loving what we want, we will find ourselves free from a lot of manipulation. It only works because of what you value that you believe that person holds. And because you value that more than you trust God, you can be manipulated, or you manipulate. Now, I think about this in my life, and I think about all of what I've went through, all of where I am and what I'm learning as I'm growing. And I realize that this is such an ugly thing, and it's so subtle. I mean, subtle to the point where if you think about it, how often has it happened in your world? And now as you sit back and think about it, it's like, boy, this goes on a lot in my marriage, in my family. When I start to notice this and pick up on it as I was doing it and it was being done to me, what happened was I had to make some decisions. I had to decide if I was going to love God and love the person more than I was loving the thing or the desire, whatever it is that I wanted from the person. And I had to be ready for people to walk away, to pout, to reject, to criticize, and all the stuff that comes. I had to be ready for that. And that changed my world. Because what I recognize is when my desire for what I wanted began to diminish and my love for God and others began to increase, people's manipulation became less and less over me. And people would raise their voices and they would ask questions and they would do all these things, and I would just say, oh, no, thank you. And I started to do it more with a smile. But I knew it was going to cost me. But it was okay. Now, my question to you is, where are you when you think about this manipulation? How much of it have you participated in? Both ways. I want to talk about, in closing, how do we deal with manipulation? Number one, as you look at your notes, acknowledge why you can be manipulated. Because we have desires we have made ungodly, we are easily manipulated by people. A person can manipulate us because we have made the individual the source of our satisfaction or the solution to our problems, leading us to fear the person as we should fear God. Consider some of the reasons you are manipulated. Number one, overly dependent on a person to satisfy desires and or meet particular needs in your life. The fear of losing or not gaining those desires and needs from the person leads you to be manipulated. Overly dependent on people's approval. Overly dependent on a person's companionship or attention or affection towards you. Overly dependent on a person finding you significant, valuable, or important. Watch this. The control, the coercion, the constraining through evil means works on you, not because of the power of the manipulator, but because of what you want. Do you see you in any of that list? How important is attention and affection to you? How important is security? How important is respect and being held in high regard? How important is approval to you? And what are you willing to do for it? And how easily can you be manipulated because of it? See, these are the kind of things that we have to think about, because everything I'm sharing with you comes back to desires that I've made demands. Here's the second thing. Excuse me. Acknowledge the awful ways you address manipulation. We are told not to answer a fool according to his or her foolishness. That means we're not to act foolishly in response to a person acting foolishly with us. Therefore, we need to make sure that when we're manipulated, we don't try to defend ourselves, that we don't try to justify our words or our actions, that we don't blame shift, that we don't answer the question in a time when they should not be addressed. Sometimes people will ask me questions and I flat out will not answer them. This person thought that, and again, I tell people I'm accountable to basically two sets of people: leadership that I'm with and my wife. So there are a few things that other people can ask that I may or may not answer because I'm not necessarily accountable. So this one particular week, I was with my family, and I said to everybody, and I said to a lot of people, hey, listen, this Friday I'll be out of pocket, spending time with the family, but we'll get with you on Monday. This person called on a Friday and didn't get an answer. I get a call on Monday. Where were you? I'm saying, okay, Lord, how am I going to respond to this? It's not my mama, not my daddy, not the leaders, not my wife. I said, how can I help you? Where were you? I called you on Friday and I didn't. I said, how can I help you? Now, in my flesh, I had to fight my flesh, and I'm not going to tell you what I was thinking. But my mind, I'm saying now, I shared with everybody that this Friday I would not be available, and you're charging me up on Monday as if I owe you something. And that maybe works with other people, but I didn't go there. I just responded, how can I help you? What can I do? I tried to have a gentle answer to turn away wrath. That makes sense? But my flesh wanted to go a whole nother direction. And I was just that, you remember that Galatians 5, the flesh wrestles against the spirit? There was a wrestling going on. One, I don't like people yelling at me, and I don't yell at people. So, so I had to work that part out. But the idea that, again, you thought that I'm your personal servant and that I need to be wherever you want me to be because right now it's about you. I had to wrestle and work that through and be loving. Do not overcome evil with evil, but overcome evil with what? Good. See, I had to go through all of that in my mind because in my flesh, I had a whole other answer ready. This is what we have to do, guys. Not returning evil for evil, sometimes not even answering a question that doesn't even need to be answered. Here's another thing. We have to make sure that we don't yell at the person, dismiss the person, treat the person the way the person is treating you, retaliate in ways that are physically and verbally harmful. If we've done those things, we need to acknowledge, you know what, Lord, this is not the way to handle manipulation. Third thing I want you to think about, ascertain the nature of the matter. If we are being wise in a matter, we will think before we speak. We will listen to understand the nature of the issues before we will respond. We will listen to discern the issue behind the manipulation. Therefore, when someone is trying to manipulate you, you seek to discern the issue behind the manipulation through asking some questions. And I want us to think about this because these questions that we need to ask are very helpful. And I talked a little bit about it last night, but I wanted to leave room to talk about it more today. Because sometimes when people are trying to manipulate and they may come at you, you've got to really discern if it's the proper time to say or not say, or what to say. Is this, question number one, is this a matter of preference? Again, if I were to ask you all, what's the quickest way to get to Miami? How many different ways am I going to get in this room probably? 5, 6, 7, 8 maybe, right? And if I said, is this the quickest way, what would all you tell me? This is the quickest way, right? So with a preference issue, we have to be careful when people are charging us up because a lot of times when people are manipulative, they have moralized their preference, like we talked about last night. And so they're trying to manipulate you into accepting that you are wrong because you didn't do something the way they thought should be done. But in the essence, it was a moralization of a way, not the way. And you got to ask yourself, okay, if this is a preference issue and I'm trying to be pushed into a corner, I need to recognize this is preference. So I need to decide how to answer this in the God-honoring way or not answer at all. You know, I've had some people, I just think we ought to do it this way. Don't you think that? I mean, no one who is not smart would consider any other option. I've heard people say that to me. Don't you think that? And I would say to them, well, I think that you have a freedom to think that perspective. But don't you think it's dumb for someone to do this? I think that at this situation, we all have different perspectives on how this could go down. Well, I just think it's dumb. You've made that very clear. You see where I'm going? Easily can be manipulated, but it's a preference. Is this a matter of conscience? In other words, Romans 14, it may be right for you, but wrong for me. I need to not let which is good for me be spoken of as evil. I need to be careful. Is this an issue of morality? Then I need to speak up in the appropriate way. Is this a matter of wisdom, the best course of action? Is this person wanting something from you that they're not getting? Is this person losing something from you that they do not want to lose? Is this person receiving something from you they do not want? What is the expectation belief system being addressed to you? What is the disappointment or the belief system addressed to you? See, these are the things you need to be thinking about when people come at you with their manipulation. What is it that they're trying to accomplish? Number 4, approach the person being considerate, compassionate, and controlled. What does that mean practically? What you say matters, but how you say it is just as important. When dealing with the manipulator, make sure your tone reflects the grace of God. You're not trying to get them. They're trying to get you. You're not trying to shake them up. They're trying to move you to do something in a certain way, and you recognize the game, and instead of playing the game, you have changed the game for God's glory and their good. And when that happens, you start to go at it a whole nother direction. And you have to check your tone. And I know sometimes I have to be very careful because I can be very sarcastic. And that could get me in trouble. You know, people would say, boy, you sure are fat. And I go, boy, you sure are ugly. Which one of us can change? See, I was that guy. So I have to be very, very careful. And some of you are that girl and that guy like me. And so you know you can use your tongue and it could be nasty and not nice, and you want to glorify God. Is somebody with me out there? Y'all understand where I'm coming from? And when people come at you with manipulation, you want to be careful, considerate, compassionate. So what does that mean? Speak in gentle ways to that person. Speak using self-control when talking to the person. Speak words that minister grace and not disgrace. Do not interrupt the person unless there's a proper reason to do so. Clarify your words and intentions when prudent to do so. Do not speak too much, knowing sin is inevitable. These are things, guys, if you just slow down. Now, watch this. It's hard to do this if you're more offended than you want to serve. And when I'm more offended than I want to serve, I need to go in a corner for a moment, take a moment, renew my mind, renew my heart, make sure that I can get my attitude right so that I can love. Now, when people offend you, there's one or two reasons that you're offended. Or we use the word hurt. And so when people say I was offended or this person hurt me, I say, okay, well, let's go behind these big words, and I'm going to ask you two central questions. Number one, did they sin against you and you're experiencing hurt or offense? Or number two, did they disappoint your expectations and you're experiencing hurt or offense? Because there are two different things. If someone has sinned against you, the Bible is very clear after you deal with your attitude what needs to happen when someone has sinned against you. But if someone has disappointed your expectations, perhaps this is an opportunity for you to begin to lower your expectations and raise your love. Because maybe what you want has become more important than what God wills, and this is a divine appointment to get you to see the blessing of this disappointment to direct you into that which is more God-honoring versus self-serving. Who knows? We have to evaluate. But that's when people say, I've been hurt, I'm going to go behind that word, disappointed or sinned against. Two different directions with that pain, quote unquote, of hurt or offense. We got to think that way, guys. Number 5, address the matter using discernment and the wisdom of God so that the foolish person does not think that he or she is wise in his or her own estimation of the manipulation. You should be God-honoring or use God-honoring wisdom. So let me walk you through some of these as we are hurrying to the close here. Speak to the matter without attacking the person about the matter. Something that I learned from ACBC that's been so much of a blessing to me. Attack the problem, not the person. Now, if you believe the person is the problem, then what will you do? Attack the person. So part of our challenge in any given situation is to recognize this is not my enemy. So I need to quit treating them as if they're the enemy. Let me attack the problem, not the person. Let's look at the situation. Also, address the matter according to your role within the matter. Am I a leader? Am I subordinate? Am I co-equal? Let me come at this according to my role. Address the belief system of the person that's driving the matter. Address the goal of the person that's driving the matter. Address the desires of the person that is driving the matter. Distinguish between the person's opinion about the matter and the genuine facts of the matter. Distinguish between your obligations to the person within the matter and the person's expectation of you in the matter. Now, that's very important because my role in a situation and what you want from me in a situation may not be the same. Does that make sense? And we need to learn that sometimes because sometimes what people want from you may not be wrong, but that may not be your role. And then they're demanding something from you that's really not for you to do, and they need to get a grip. But in your role, there's something you need to do. And where there's manipulation, a lot of times people want you to do things for them that you shouldn't be doing anyway. And the moment you allow that to be your course of direction, we're moving towards devastation. Here's the next thing to consider. Distinguish between promises you may be breaking or expectations not being realized from you for the person within the matter. Distinguish between past hurts and the present issue, or how it could be a continuum of past hurts with the present issue. And then finally, number 6, appeal to God's specific word about the matter. Identify clear principles of God's word that can speak to the manipulation. Address the matter according to the biblical standards. Address the matter according to what the Bible says each person is to do. Use logic within the conversation without being sarcastic or condescending. Focus on what is right instead of who is right. Speak the truth in love. Address the sin accordingly. Do not take responsibility for other people's thoughts and emotions and desires and words and actions. Do not accept other people's standards as the standard of measure for what is right. Do not comply to the course of action if doing so would support the person's agenda of manipulation. Seek to do what would bring the greatest glory to God and the biggest God-honoring benefit to the person. Again, I've gone through them quickly, but there's just some practical things that you have to go back and just really sit on for a moment. But here's what I want you to do. I want you to take just about 3 minutes before we transition. And I want you to talk to the person next to you. And again, here's the question. So what? How does this apply to our marriage or our relationship? And what are we going to do about it? So what? How does this apply to our marriage or relationship? What are we going to do about it? Take about 3 minutes, and we'll come back, we'll transition into something else.